Well, good morning. My name is Anantha Duraiappah. Welcome to MGIEP's Chat Over Chai. Today, I'm really excited to have Shombi Sharp, the resident coordinator of UN India. Uh, Mr. Sharp has got over 25 years of experience, a lot of that in the UN across many continents, Middle East, Southern Africa, Eastern Europe. So we have someone who's really covered pretty much a lot of the parts of the world. And prior to the UN, he was also part of CARE, worked in Tanzania and in Africa. So we have somebody today who's got lots of experience. I'm really excited to have you, Shombi, here today for our first Chat Over Chai. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Anantha, and really it's a pleasure on behalf of the United Nations country team in India to be a part of this chat with the MGIEP and this really truly important topic. So let me just say, aap sabko UN House mein swagat hai.
Thank you. So I think today we were thinking about talking a little bit about mental health and primarily focusing on the younger generation. Children, adolescents, one of the most difficult periods if one can recall our own time growing up, the kinds of pressures that we have. Now we've just, many would say we're coming out of COVID, sometimes we're saying we're still in COVID, but that pandemic has really hit us hard. Many of us would not remember the 1915, which was, I think, the benchmark of the biggest pandemic since this one, in terms of casualties and stuff. We have had some in between, but so most of us, this was a real awakening, and we have learned a lot. But today I want to talk a little bit about what many in the health community and now even in the education community are starting to call the silent pandemic. And this is about mental health disorders, mental illness, and especially now really permeating down to the younger generation. I was really shocked when I was reading a 2015 report, WHO report, which says, and you're in India, so I'll just refer to, but this is a global phenomenon, is that 25% of children between the ages of 13 and 15 in India have some form of mental disorder. It can be varying from the spectrum in terms of just depression, anxiety, but it is having an impact on their daily lives. 25%, that's huge. So tell me some of your thoughts based on the fact that you have a huge program here in India. You have to coordinate, I think, 17 agencies you were mentioning, but 26 entities. So give us a little bit about your thoughts.
Thank you, Anantha. And again, I think this is really important topic during this International Children's Mental Health Week to raise. And I think you've touched on something that, first of all, yes, this is mental health is being called a silent pandemic. Having we know from research, WHO and such, that the levels globally of sort of mental health pressures experienced by young people across the board increased by something like 25% in just the first year alone of the pandemic. So we're still kind of learning and understanding the full impact, together with learning losses, kids being shut out of schools and things. But the point is that even before COVID, this was in
Yes.
Most countries of the world, mental health is a really truly important part of our collective well-being that is generally suppressed by society's big issues of stigma, these sorts of things. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, has said that mental health and well-being is, a core part of our human existence and should be treated both as seriously and as normally as physical health.
Yes.
But we generally don't do that, and what we see is that in particular, younger people are affected, or persons with disabilities are affected, and there are so many stresses. As you mentioned, we were all young once.
Yes.
Many of us are, Jo Dil Se Young Hai, so we keep that spirit. But But when you're young, especially, the brain is going through a lot of, chemistry changes. There are pressures in schools. Families are putting a lot of pressures on. We can all remember that what in hindsight seems like small things, kind of would take over our world. So it's really, really important that society understands, as a whole of society approach, to understand that this is really something that affects all of us. And anybody who sort of thinks that they don't have issues of mental health in their lives, whether individually, within the family setting, really is either just unaware or sort of not being honest with themselves.
Yeah.
Globally, we know that something like 1 in 5 young people are facing mental health issues on a fairly regular basis. In India, that number I think is estimated at 1 in 7. But the biggest challenge is to try to break down that stigma, to normalize the issues, to understand that it's a mental health really it's a continuum, right? And it's a dynamic that many of us, we can kind of based as a result of various pressures, as a result of various physical, psychological issues, may dip in and out of stresses, anxieties, and this sort of a thing, and that's okay, and that's normal. But we need an ecosystem that helps recognize and address and work through these issues.
So you hit a couple of interesting points. You talked about the age and the fact that we put it as brain maturation, and where at adolescence your hormones are raging.
Yeah.
The different parts of the limbic, what we call the limbic, which is so responsible. Many people say the heart, but we tend to say it's the limbic that's controlling everything. And our education systems don't seem to be thinking about addressing that particularly. It's so focused on the standard numeracy, literacy. If you look at SDG 4 and the way that we have put those indicators, it's about school enrollments, numeracies, and then literacies, and whether we're doing that. Now we have a learning crisis, as you know. Even before COVID, we had about 57%. That's huge, of kids at the age of 10 who can read but can't comprehend. And now that latest data coming from the World Bank has got on to 70%. India is around 60 hovering and stuff. That's kind of mind-boggling. But to address that learning crisis, and now taking COVID, and with all these factors that you just mentioned about pressures, lots of kids have lost parents, they have lost loved ones in this COVID, they're still struggling to come to terms. And then we're kind of now saying, get back to where you were before the COVID in terms of the standard indicators. And I remember we had the opportunity to work with this huge network of schools in India, residential schools that were set up by the government. And we found so much of emotional stress. And I think one of the things that we felt really happy was, one of the first reactions was to get counselors. Somebody that the kids can talk to. Teachers have been trained in a very different way. So just letting focus on the education system. What would be your thoughts? You had mentioned some really interesting points, which a lot of times I tend to think that if we don't and as the Secretary General has said, we need to reboot the system, the education at the recent Transformative Education Summit in New York. We need to reboot the system. Give us your thoughts on what that rebooting would look like based on some of the factors that you had mentioned.
Well, thank you. I think certainly we need to kind of turn crisis into opportunity. So learn the lessons from what's happened in the pandemic. The pandemic obviously accelerated many processes that were already underway. So this kind of move towards telecommuting, teleeducation, this sort of thing, that digitalization of processes. Here in India, there have been some amazing success stories of taking that turning crisis into opportunity. Digital banking, for example, in particular of women and such. But So, we have here in India, there are some really important government programs that the UN is very pleased to support. The school health and wellness program, part of the Ayushman Bharat program, which is including mental health as a core issue to be invested in. Also the Mano Darpan additional program emerging out of COVID, looking at mental health stresses. So I think we need to learn from that and institutionalize and mainstream those supports, not look at it as something that happened because of a crisis, but rather this is the normal state of human sort of being. Now, in terms of education, I think clearly the success factors as we see in terms of performance, educational attainment, and outcomes and things requires certainly you need focus on STEM education. I mean, you need the science and technology. You need that numbers, numerical proficiencies, and ability to kind of take in large amounts of data and memorize and this sort of thing. But what you also need in a modern context is the ability to it's about critical thinking. It's about life skills. It's about how to move from data to knowledge and application. And that's a very different approach. And I think that, in many countries across the world, educational systems are shifting and moving in that direction. And in this kind of digital world, and the good news is that now young people have never had such opportunity to make a difference. If they're interested in sustainability, interested in the Sustainable Development Goals, and about helping their communities build resilience to climate change or gender equality, you name it. It's never been easier for young people to start making a difference from their living room with the connectivity that we have, with digital connectivity and such. But I think this, it's about the whole of society type of view. So we cannot provide that kind of enabling environment for young people if teachers are not themselves aware and skilled to be able to recognize and address mental health issues. If parents are also not aware and skilled, I'm reminded of when you're taking a flight on Air India or any other carrier. At the beginning, they're telling you, look, if there's any need for the oxygen mask, the adults, you should put it on first, then help your child. Now, is that being selfish? No, of course not. That's because you will be able to much better help the child if you yourself are capable. Now, in mental health issues, of course, we should be addressing the whole of society. Yeah. But we have to understand that the adults in the picture, the teachers, the educators, the parents, also are very much in need of awareness and support, therapy, access to just like physical healthcare as well, to be able to help their children.
So first is to get rid of that stigma, so that it's not a problem, it's just natural. And just like if you sprain your knee, you go to a doctor, you go to a counselor, and it should be part of the system.
Absolutely.
But you brought out an interesting fact of the future, and I think I call it the mixed reality, in a sense that you're going into looking at the movie The Matrix. Now, it's the younger generation are going to be moving in the matrix, but still we are physical, so we have to be in the physical. So moving in and out of what we call this mixed reality is going to be so much more pressure on our mental state. And so building those, what we call social competencies, social emotional competence, self-regulation, emotion regulation. When I first talk about emotion regulations, people were like, you want to suppress anger. The reaction is no. Anger is part of our natural emotions. But to teach a child or an adult or even a teacher is to recognize that you're angry, understand why you're angry, and then rationally act on it. I find that they call it the soft skills. I find that the hardest skills. I find it so much easier to learn maths than training on these emotional stuff.
Right.
So, as you move forward, how do you see the UN, if you look at India with the new education policy, I think it's a brilliant policy. Implementation is going to be the challenge. but they have taken the whole person approach. Social emotional learning is actually, there's a whole paragraph in the NEP on that. So with the UN, how do you see the UN with your 17 entities? You got WHO, you got UNICEF, you got UNESCO, then you have this obscure thing institute called MGIEP as well. How do you see yourself bringing this group together? We've always worked in our silos. That's your challenge. I wouldn't envy you. It's one of the biggest things, bringing people together to this common goal that we want. And then with this new whole area of mental health, which has so much stigma, tell us how you see over the next few years. You've been, I wanted to also applaud you. You've been here 2021, late 2021.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
so
just
it was
over
a year and a half.
A year and 2 months.
You're throwing Hindi words, and I'm kind of struggling after 8 years. So, but please, how do you see in terms of bringing this family together to address the whole society, whole approach, and education? We tend to put it in silo, but we are continuously learning, aren't we? Yes. So it's education always. So
absolutely, absolutely. I mean. Education is a lifelong learning process, no doubt about it, and more, again, as our life expectancies increase, again, digital technology, the world of work is changing all of the time, and our agencies are engaged in that. So I think, first of all, we have a really great capacity here in terms of the UN family, UN team in India. We're actually one of the largest in the world, probably second, third maybe in the world. A UN presence in a development setting, so setting aside humanitarian crises and such. We have 26 entities, 17 sort of agencies, funds and programs, over 300 internationals, 4,200 something personnel across the country, 17 sub-offices in states. And one of the, India has so many resources. India is obviously a middle-income country, rising very, very quickly, has a very robust human resources, financial resources. So in many cases, we're working together with with our partners, with the Indian resources, and actually, more and more helping identify Indian best practice, development practice, and taking that to the international stage. So it's a two-way partnership very much. Now, when we look at, it's the whole being, whole of society, it's the whole being. And we know about the links between the mental and the physical, the psychology and the physiology, very, very strong. So we see this in an integrated way. This is the message of the Sustainable Development Goals. Our agencies are engaged in so many different ways. I mean, of course, World Health Organization, UNICEF, UNESCO, when we're looking specifically at the issue of education and young people and mental health. But UNFPA, for example, sexual reproductive health, and but it goes much beyond that, because this is fundamentally about development, and so UNDP and you name it, all of our agencies are engaged in some way or another. For example, I mean, one of the biggest factors for young people's educational outcomes and mental well-being is safe space, and as you've rightly noted, we're living in an increasingly sort of hybrid matrix kind of world. So, but we still need safe physical spaces for young people. This is particularly the case for girls and women. And we still do have in many countries, and here in India we have a problem, still a challenge to address, which is that young girls and young women face the risk of sexual sort of harassment, abuse, or worse within many settings, the educational setting as well. So how to address that, or young people with disabilities of various types, we have to work together to create safe spaces. But then in the digital world, that's now also more and more important. Yes. And we've seen, or maybe we're just more aware of the problems with cyberbullying, with all of the different risks and challenges that young people face. So how to provide them the freedom to express themselves and participate in a digital life also. Without constraining too much, but at the same time, putting in the systems to ensure that that's a safe space, and addressing and recognizing cyberbullying and other issues is important. So with the UN system, we look at this collectively and come together with our different sort of comparative advantages.
So Shombi, I know I've been picking at your brains for quite some time, but G20, we're right in the midst. Yeah. India's holding its presidency.
Right.
They're making a big, I was going to use the word show, but I don't think so. I think they're really serious about it. Yeah. And the PM's the phrase is one earth, one family, one future.
Right. Vasudha Kutumbakam.
Yeah, that's right. And somebody was in my office the other day. Now, we had a poster in 2015 with our youth, we call it Yes Peace Network, with the youth for waging peace. And we had one planet, one family, one future. So I'm not sure if I have to go to the PMs and say, did you steal this from us? But it's such a visionary statement. And how do you see a tangible, because we've seen G20s. I know the last one in Indonesia had very similar taglines and stuff. What do you see that with the amount of effort that India is putting, and it's also seen like the positioning themselves as the brokers of the world in terms of peace. I remember the PM once said, "This is not the time. The time for war is gone." Sure. That's an old concept. We need to talk about peace.
Right.
How do you see the outcome of G20, the UN role in this G20? I always find it sometimes interesting, and maybe our listeners might want to know the fact that we have a UN and then we have a small subset G20, which is same member states in the big 193 and stuff. How does the UN, and especially you in India, with the overseeing the UN family, contribute towards this and see what tangible outcomes that you expect from this?
Sure. Well, so certainly the UN is a key partner in the G20 process. I mean, has been since the beginning. Now we're in a very special phase, let's say, of the G20 because you have 4 presidencies in a row are middle-income countries. So moving from Indonesia, now India, Brazil, South Africa next, and in each of those cases, I mean, for us, kind of selfishly speaking, the difference is that we have robust country programs in those countries. So we're able to support the process, to partner in an even deeper way than we typically would be able to. And here in India, I do believe we are partnering with India's presidency in different ways to a greater degree probably than ever before. So different agencies are partnering with line ministries who are leading different sectoral working groups, for example. We have a sort of strategic partnership with the G20 Secretariat. The Sherpa, of course, is a very good partner of ours, was CEO at NITI Aayog just before Amitabh Kant, and a very, very good partner. And I think that the government sees the value of our support and in that process. So, we're doing things from providing technical expertise on issues papers, providing some, additional human resources. Again, India has extremely strong capable resources of its own. So this really is, it's a two-way partnership very much. Now, India's presidency, I really do believe, is uniquely positioned to help the world's, at least the degree to which the G20 has influence, and the G20 is massively important. Yes. I mean, it's something like 85% of the world's GDP. Yes. Right, and also accounts for a lot of the world's, let's say, climate emissions.
And the population.
Populations, so what the G20 agrees on is incredibly important. And we've seen that in the past, in the 2008 global financial crisis, and there are many other examples of the G20 providing really, really important sort of resources and tools to the broader international community. So, but India is uniquely positioned. We're at a time of incredible crisis, this, poly crisis, as it's now called. The Secretary General has called for a rescue plan of the SDGs to get back on track to get to 2030. We have anyway the triple planetary crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution. On top of that, the Ukraine war kicked off, as we know, a real crisis, and the basic necessities of life, I mean, food and energy, pushing a lot of countries between 50 to 70, depending on your metric, into debt crisis as well. So, but India has trust and relationships and partnerships across really all of the divides. I think in a way that perhaps no other country does have. Obviously, India has long been a voice of the global South, of the G77,
Yes.
has the trust and legitimacy to speak on behalf of the global South, but also has the trust and the interest of the G7. And as a fast rising middle income country, now fifth largest economy in the world, probably will be fourth or third by end of the decade. When India speaks, people listen. And this is really important. And India is bringing a human-centric, SDG-centric approach to the G20 presidency. I'm even calling it an SDG 20, in fact. And the timing for this, India is looking at really important issues, priorities like women-led development, like digital transformation, like just green transformation as well. The timing is important, not only, especially because we're in global crisis, but because India's presidency segues perfectly into the global SDG summit at the General Assembly in September. And that's precisely where the world is coming together to take stock of the SDGs and to recognize how badly have we fallen off track. What do we need to do to get back on track? And so India's presidency will actually bring, I believe it's called the SDG G20 Acceleration Action Plan, to that conversation. So really it's perfect timing. And then we carry on next year to what we're calling the Summit of the Future, which touches on your question about what comes after 2030 agenda, what comes after the SDGs. So that's something that will be, kind of taking shape following, from next year. And India's contributions are going to be really, really important.
Great. Well, Shombi, thank you very much taking for the time to spend with us this morning. Let me finish with inviting you to this chai. And with that, I would say thank you very much.
No, thank you, Anantha. And I think, thank you for the tea. And just to say, I was really pleased to speak with you on this conversation for this Children's Mental Health Week. I'm not an expert in the subject. And that's precisely why I thought it was important to speak to you, because that's the whole point. Mental health, well-being, this is something that all of us in society should be very comfortable talking about openly, freely. We were disheartened to see that in recent surveys, something like only 41% of young people in India felt like mental health issues are something that you should reach out and speak to somebody, ask for help. And that's the motto of this year's week, Children's Health Week, is let's connect.
Yes.
So the more that all of us, each one of us, can speak out openly. I know India has an increasing number of kind of influencers. Deepika Padukone, for example, fantastic.
She's a very
actor,
strong advocate. Yes.
Speaking openly. We have Yuva advocates as well. So the more that we can all, have these kinds of conversations, this is really important. And so I thank you for the opportunity.
It's okay to reach out and ask for help.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Bahut dhanyavad.